Hello and welcome to the channel. This video focuses on the fitting of the front suspension to an AOVO Pro ES80, and the front suspension is supplied by MONORIM. This is the first in a series of 3 videos, the first one focusing on the front suspension, second on fitting the rear suspension, and then the third will be a full test of the front and rear suspension. Thank you so much to MONORIM for partnering with me on this video, and as always, please like, please subscribe, it would help me out so much. Hope you enjoy the video. So let's start with the unboxing. The MONORIM front suspension for the AOVO Pro comes in a really sturdy box. This arrived with me within around 4 days of getting a tracking number, and I'd already opened this box prior to recording this video to get a sense of what was inside. So as I open the box here, there is actually another piece of foam padding which holds the suspension in place, which isn't included in the video, but essentially what you open up here is what's included. So starting with a basic set of tools, which includes some Allen keys and a 16 to 18mm spanner. This is a long through bolt and some spacers, which you'll see used later on in this video. I'll put the suspension to one side just for the moment, and this is important. The blue shock spring is labelled as strong for heavier riders. I'll swap that out for the yellow spring later on in this video. Wheel covers that cover the bolts, and the decals are applied to those. Some extra parts here for the pole to ensure that the pole doesn't oversteer from left to right. There is a QR code there for the instructions. Some red decals for the AOVO Pro and some orange decals if you're using the suspension on the Xiaomi M365. Getting into the suspension itself, I've seen quite a few suspension parts online, and they've often looked very flimsy, but I was incredibly impressed when the MONORIM suspension arrived. It's a really solid piece of engineering, really impressive. So yeah, really happy with the whole kit as it arrived, and I was super excited to get this fitted and get this video filmed. So, fitting the MONORIM front suspension. This is the main element of this video, and I've got my AOVO Pro ES80 set up on a table there, as you can see. And the first job is to really carefully remove the decals that are on the wheel covers. If you wanted to use these decals again, it's really important that you undertake this task really carefully in order to not rip the decals. The glue doesn't sort of stay on the decals. You will need to apply some new glue if you wanted to use them again, but the choice is yours. For me, I have really carefully removed them. However, I do use the new decals later on in this video, as you will see. Now, there are 4 screws that hold the wheel cover on. The wheel cover exposes the nut that holds the wheel on this side. There's a repeat task to undertake on the other side, but on this side there are 4 screws that need to be removed using a 2.5mm Allen key. I've used my own Allen keys. I've got a good set of quite high quality Allen keys. So as you can see here, there's a slot for the cable to go into, but that is the nut that goes to the motor. An identical task here on the other side. Again, very carefully remove this decal, just a single strip decal on the front left hand side as you're on the scooter. I managed to remove both decals without ripping either of them. And this exposes the wheel cover, and this time there are just 2 screws to remove, and again this exposes the nut that holds the wheel on, and the next task will be to remove both of the nuts. However, there are many parts that need to be taken, and I often find it's much easier to have a pot to save all of them in. These are tiny little parts that are likely to roll off a table, and it's just easier in my experience just to have a pot to pop all these parts into. That's true for these very small bolts that hold the plastic cover onto the fork. Now I'm removing these bolts on the plastic fork cover as it enables much easier access to the nut when you come to it, unscrew it, which you'll see shortly. So very flexible piece of plastic there. You'll get the spanner right onto that nut if you remove the plastic cover. And again, on the front left hand side, as you're standing on the scooter, exactly the same exercise. Just remove these 4 small screws using the 2.5mm Allen key, and again the plastic covering on the fork becomes very flexible, and it's much easier to access that nut with the 18mm spanner supplied. This is quite a new scooter, so you know, these nuts came undone really easily. Older scooters, you might find you need a bit of WD-40 or something to just get into those nuts and ensure that they're much easier to remove, but no problems for me here in terms of getting that nut off. Similarly for the front right hand side, as you're on the scooter, the nut snaps undone here. What's really important here is, as you will see, I managed to sort of drop the wheel here. Just keep hold of it as you're undoing those nuts. This is a really expensive part of the scooter, and you do not want that cable coming out of the wheel there. Just pop it on the scooter, make sure that that wheel doesn't fall. You do not want to be replacing that as the most expensive part of the scooter. And then moving on to the centre bolt, the next task with the pole folded down is just to remove the centre bolt that will give access to the section within the pole, which is really important in terms of the next stage of removal. So the next task here is loosening 2 large pole bolts. There is one on each side of the scooter on the pole mechanism. This clamps the pole onto the fork. So these are the largest bolts that you'll need to remove during the fitting of the MONORIM front suspension for this AOVO Pro. Really important that you use a good Allen key and do not round these bolts off, otherwise you won't be able to tighten them up later and get that important link between the pole and the fork. It's really crucial that that's a really strong fitting when you reassemble this, as you'll see later on in the video. Now, underneath the fork there is a single bolt. This is the bolt that holds the mudguard on, and in terms of the sequence of what needs to be done, and this is the important next step, as this will then enable you to pull down on the existing fork and separate it from the pole. So removing the fork is a simple case of holding on to the fork, just wriggling it down and separating it, and that exposes then the existing bearings. Keep all of those in place. Now the next important stage here is preparing the MONORIM front suspension. This blue shock coil, as you saw earlier, is for heavier riders, so I'm going to be using that inside the shock here, just removing the plastic from this shock, and inside that shock there is currently a yellow spring for lighter riders. Getting access to the shock is really simple. There are just 2 bolts, and that then means you can unscrew the shock. You need 2 Allen keys this time. This tells me really that you do need a set of Allen keys of your own, because you wouldn't be able to do this with just the tools provided. So if you're doing any maintenance like this, I mean, it's highly likely that you'll have some Allen keys anyway, but if you haven't, just get a decent set of Allen keys. They're not too expensive and well worth the investment. So as you can see, a long and short bolt there with a washer on. Just carefully put those to one side and make sure that they don't get lost. And as you can see here, I'm just unscrewing the MONORIM shock, and that exposes the internal shock parts. Nothing falls apart here, all pretty straightforward. I take the yellow shock spring out, take the sticker off of the blue shock spring, and that goes into the shock itself. Be careful to not cross thread when you put the shock back together, and you should have the MONORIM logo facing outwardly as the shock goes back together. So then it's quite a simple task of reassembling these 2 bolts. It threads through nice and easily. Use the long bolt first, remembering the washer, and on the other side it's a case of just screwing that in carefully, and then again using the 2 Allen keys just to give that a tighten. And that is the suspension prepared to be fitted. So no sooner that the shock bolts had been tightened up, I realised that the bearings are actually still attached to the suspension. So off come those shock bolts again. This will enable you to remove the bearings from the new MONORIM suspension. It also gives you that opportunity to move the black piece at the very left of the picture there, that goes on top of the mounting tube, and that means that the fitting is so much easier. So yeah, this is an essential part of the process. There's the 2 bolts again. Just remove that and you can see that piece on the left hand side, that U-shaped piece that I'm just about to remove, gives you the opportunity to take those bearings off. That keeps everything in place, and we are ready to mount the suspension to the scooter. So I offer up the suspension into the steering tube, and for the first time, just really to hold things in place, I've popped the steering restrictor into the suspension tube just to hold everything in place, but I'll put that back on properly in a second. It's quite difficult doing this thing with one hand really, so sometimes it always feels like it might be better to do this with two people, but there you go, there's the turn restrictor fitted properly. And there is a plastic mount which goes on top of the turn restrictor. The plastic mount has got two locating pins, so you'll know when that's in place correctly. It fits really flush on top of that steering tube and it's just holding everything in place there. So we're getting close towards finishing this mounting of the suspension off. It's time to return the bars and the pole to the suspension. So in reverse order, the first task here is to get that bar on, and you'll remember from earlier on in the video there were two large bolts, the largest bolts that you need to tighten as part of fitting this suspension. So an opportunity now just to tighten them a little. It's worth just leaving them reasonably tight, but not too tight, so you can ensure that the steering is straight and lined up with the front wheel once all of that is in place. So just enough bite here to hold the suspension together, ensuring that there's plenty of give in the steering, but everything is compressed nicely. You can see I just have to give that another tighten there. Next is the centre bolt. So again, from earlier on in the video, you'll remember that there was a centre bolt that was removed. This is being put back in place now, and tightening this with everything else still loose means that all of the parts then sort of get compressed together and give you that strong bond between the top and the bottom of the tube. So for the second time we are tightening these shock bolts again. So same task as before, but in this instance the shock is now obviously mounted to the scooter rather than separate from. So persevere with this. We've got everything in place now, so just a little bit more fiddly, a little bit more tricky in terms of getting the bolts together, but 2 Allen keys again and that is completely in place. All good. At this point it's worth giving the shock bolt a really good tighten, because this should be the last time that the whole mechanism needs to be put back together. So absolutely worth checking that the mechanism, the bolts are all nice and tight. And you'll remember from the very start of the video, the unboxing, inside the box was this long bolt and spacers. So this actually goes through the suspension, the spacer goes in between the suspension, the bolt goes right through the steering pole, and then onto the other side where there's a spacer, and then of course you get the opportunity to tighten it up. Quite fiddly, everything needs to be lined up correctly, so it's not worth hammering it in or anything like that. It's just worth taking your time, making sure that the parts are all lined up correctly. There you go, it just popped through then. And there we're putting the tightening bolt on the other side. 2 Allen keys again, and that is pretty much the mechanism all together. We're in the home straight now in terms of getting this suspension fitted and complete, nice and tight. So don't put the wheel back on. This is in the important next step. The mudguard has to go on next. You can't fit the mudguard when the wheel is in place. So get that sequence correctly. You're able to leave the mount quite loose at this stage, but there is a spacer that goes between the mudguard and the mount. So make sure it's really tight, and then and only then can the wheel be returned. You can see that the mudguard is still really loose there. You can tighten that up afterwards, and that is part of this video as well, so I'll show you how to do that. So just tightening the wheel nut there again using the 18mm spanner, making sure that the wheel is running true, and on this side there are 2 bolts. If you recall, this is the side that does not have the motor cable running to the wheel, so just 2 bolts, and eventually I will apply the decal when I know that everything's working. The decal on this side being the one with the single strip rather than the U shape. Now on this side, slightly different in that the wheel cover has to have the cable guided inside it, and on that basis there are 4 bolts that need to be returned, so it's worth taking your time and making sure that that cable is sitting correctly in the middle of that wheel cover. So the second screw going in, and that is looking like it's going to line up nicely. Third screw going in, and again the decal will be applied here when I know that the MONORIM suspension is all running correctly. So that leaves very little to be done. The next task here is to ensure that the mudguard bolts are tightened, and I've left the scooter upside down here once again just to ensure that the mudguard is nicely lined up and I can see what I'm doing, but this has got sort of infinite adjustment, so once you know that your MONORIM suspension is fitted, just a simple case of tightening up 2 bolts here to line up the mudguard nicely with the wheel. And the decals have been fitted, and this is the finished suspension. Looks amazing, really well engineered, so really happy with the way that it all went together. I think it looks great. I'm really happy with the way that the colours of the suspension match the scooter. I think it looks really classy, and I think MONORIM have done a great job with the design of this suspension for the front of the AOVO Pro ES80. However, proof's in the pudding, and here is the first test of the suspension. So just in some local streets around near where I live, and as you can see from the footage there, the suspension is really absolutely very active and is absorbing a huge amount of the shocks that the scooter would normally give you if this is a scooter with solid tyres rather than pneumatic tyres. So the solution just seems so helpful here in terms of the suspension, and coupled with those solid tyres, normally going over bumps like that, you would really get quite a rattle through the bars, but as you can see there, the shock is taking a huge amount of the movement out of the road. I'm riding at around 90 miles an hour here, so top speed for this AOVO Pro ES80. Really happy with the way that the whole thing has worked. So there you go, that is the fitting of the front suspension supplied by MONORIM to the AOVO Pro ES80. Really hope that you found the video useful and that it may help you consider getting front suspension for your e-scooter, including the AOVO Pro. Thank you so much for watching. As always, please like, please subscribe, it would help me out so much, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.